Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today we're tackling someone who's I guess you could say a pretty controversial figure, but also a hugely influential thinker. We are going to be diving into the world of Karl Marx.
Karl Marx.
Now, I know whenever his name comes up, people kind of get a little tense.
Yeah.
You know, communism, all that. But we're going to try to go a little deeper than those surface level takes that you always hear, and we're going to try and understand the evolution of his thought. Because it's a fascinating journey, and we're going to be using to help us on this journey a book by Jose Manuel Bermudo. It's called Marx, From Agora to Market.
Right.
And it's really interesting stuff because what we see is Marx starting out as a champion of philosophy in the state.
Yeah.
He believes that, reason embodied in the state is the way that we're going to see progress.
Yeah, you can think of him as like an Enlightenment thinker in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
In his early years.
Yeah. But then he takes this radical turn. He ends up advocating for
revolution, for a system that is completely different from anything that the world had ever seen. So how do we get there?
It is a long journey. And I think to understand it, we need to go back to the beginning and look at Marx's early life and influences. He was born in Trier, Germany in 1818.
Not exactly like a hotbed of revolution. At the time?
Not quite a revolutionary hotbed, no. But even in this seemingly ordinary town, you can see the seeds of some of Marx's later radicalism.
So, for example, his family's Jewish heritage.
Right.
His father had to convert to Christianity.
Was forced to convert to Christianity.
Forced, yeah. Do you think that played a role in his later critiques of religion and the state?
It's hard to say for sure.
Yeah.
But you can definitely see how that early exposure to religious hypocrisy might have shaped his thinking. I mean, put yourself in his shoes, your father forced to convert. There's this sense of injustice there.
Definitely.
And then he becomes fascinated with philosophy, especially Hegel.
Hegel.
Yeah, the German philosopher.
Right. And he gets involved with this group called the Young Hegelians. And these were radical thinkers. They were challenging the norms, using philosophy as a weapon to critique the world around them.
They were debating in the coffee shops, I imagine.
Oh, yeah. Lots of late-night debates about the nature of reality, the role of the state, all the big questions.
So did they think that philosophy was a tool for social change?
They absolutely did. They believed that reason, and in particular reason embodied in the state, was the path to progress.
Okay, so they weren't just content with, sitting around.
Yeah.
And debating ideas.
They wanted to see real change. And Marx very much believed in the power of the state at this point.
Okay, interesting.
In fact, even his doctoral thesis focuses on these two ancient Greek philosophers, Democritus and Epicurus.
Democritus and Epicurus.
Yeah, they had very different views on the role of the state and the nature of reality.
Okay, so ancient Greek philosophy. I'm trying to see how that ties into Marx's later revolutionary ideas.
Well, think about it. Marx saw himself as a modern-day Prometheus, stealing fire from the gods.
Prometheus.
Yeah, the guy who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humans.
Okay, see where you're going with this.
In this case, the fire is knowledge. Marx wanted to take the knowledge that was held by the elite and give it to the people.
So it was about empowering the masses through knowledge, through education.
Exactly.
That's a powerful image.
It is, and it shows you how deeply he believed in the power of ideas. But it didn't take long for Marx to realize that ideas alone weren't enough.
Right, because he doesn't stay in the ivory tower forever.
No, he doesn't.
He gets involved in journalism.
Right, he starts writing for the Rheinische Zeitung.
That's a newspaper.
Yeah, it was a radical newspaper at the time.
Okay, and that brings him face to face with the realities of censorship, the limits of free expression.
Exactly. He comes up against the censors who are trying to control what could be said and published.
So he starts to see the state not as an instrument of reason and progress, but as a tool that often reinforces existing power structures.
You got it. And this is a crucial turning point. He famously writes, "The weapon of criticism cannot, of course, replace criticism of the weapon."
So he's saying we need more than just words. We need action.
We need material change.
So where does he go next? I mean, what fills that void?
Well, that's where his encounter with the working class comes in.
Okay.
He moves to Paris, and he's exposed to the brutal realities of poverty, exploitation, and social unrest.
I can only imagine how different that must have been from the world of academic debate.
Oh, absolutely. It was a real eye-opener for him. He's seeing firsthand the suffering that capitalism is creating.
And this is where he starts to develop his critique of capitalism.
This is it. He's reading Adam Smith, David Rickard, all the big names in economics. But he's not just passively absorbing their theories. He's critiquing them, dissecting them, looking for the flaws in their logic.
And this leads him to one of his most important concepts.
Alienated labor.
Alienated labor, exactly.
Okay, so for folks who are not familiar with this term,
Sure.
Can you break it down for us? Basically, it's the idea that under capitalism, work becomes this dehumanizing experience.
Okay, so it's not just about having a bad boss or being paid low wages.
Right, it's deeper than that. It's about the very structure of work under capitalism. It's about how our labor is used to create profit for someone else.
So even if you have a job that you know pays well, there's still this underlying sense of disconnect.
There can be. This feeling that you're not really in control of your own work. You're just a cog in the machine.
And that this disconnect, this alienation, has profound consequences.
Absolutely.
Both for us as individuals and for society as a whole.
It affects our well-being.
Yeah.
It shapes our relationships. It even influences the way we see the world.
And this is where things get really interesting.
This is where we get to the heart of Marx's critique.
Because he argues that alienated labor actually creates the conditions for private property, not the other way around.
Right. We tend to think of private property as the foundation of capitalism. But Marx flips that idea on its head.
So he's saying that private property is a consequence of alienated labor, not the cause.
Precisely.
It makes you question everything you thought you knew about how the economic system works.
It does, and that's the power of Marx's analysis.
Wow, so this is a pretty radical departure from the way most people think about these things.
It is, and it leads Marx to identify the root of the problem. Not in individual greed or ambition, but in the social relations of production themselves.
Okay, what does that mean, the social relations of production?
It's about the power dynamics between those who own the means of production, the capitalists,
Okay.
and those who have only their labor to sell,
They're workers?
the workers.
Right.
And that tension, that fundamental conflict,
Yeah.
that's what drives history, according to Marx.
So he's moving away from this idea that history is driven by ideas, by
Yeah.
great thinkers.
Right.
And he's saying, no, it's actually about this underlying economic conflict.
Exactly. He calls this historical materialism.
Historical material.
Yeah, it's a key concept in his thinking.
I have to admit, that sounds a little intimidating.
I know it sounds complicated, but it's actually a pretty simple idea.
Okay, I'm listening.
Basically, it means that the way people organize their lives, their societies, their governments, even their ideas and beliefs, are ultimately shaped by the material conditions of their existence.
So it's not about abstract ideas shaping history. It's about the very practical, material ways in which people meet their basic needs.
Exactly. It's about how they work, what they produce, how they trade and distribute goods.
It's about the stuff.
It's about the stuff.
So our ideas don't shape the world shapes our ideas.
In a nutshell.
Yes. That's a pretty big shift in perspective.
It is, and it has profound implications for how we understand history, society, and even ourselves.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all fits together. So how does this idea of historical materialism lead Marx to see history as a series of class struggles?
Well, if the way we produce and reproduce our lives is the foundation of everything else, then the relationships we form around production become central to understanding history. And Marx argues that those relationships have always been defined by class conflict, by the struggle between those who control the means of production and those who don't.
So in feudal times, it was the lords versus the serfs. And in the capitalist era, it's the bourgeoisie, the owners of capital,
Right.
versus the proletariat, the working class.
Exactly.
Okay, so this conflict, this struggle over resources and power,
That's what drives historical change.
it's the engine of history.
It's the engine of history.
And this brings us to Marx's idea of the proletariat as the universal class, the class that's destined to overthrow capitalism and create a new classless society.
Right. The proletariat is the revolutionary class, according to Marx,
But why the proletariat?
because they are the ones who experience the contradictions of capitalism most acutely.
In what way?
They are the ones who suffer most directly from its inherent inequalities and injustices.
Because they're the ones actually doing the work.
They're the ones creating the wealth, but they don't get to enjoy the fruits of their labor.
Okay, so they have the most to gain from a revolution.
And they have the least to lose.
So they're the ones who are most likely to see through the illusions of capitalism
Exactly.
and recognize the need for radical change.
That's Marx's argument.
Okay, so we've gone from philosophy and the state to material conditions and class struggle. What a journey.
It's quite a journey.
But how does this critique of capitalism actually play out?
Well, that's where his magnum opus Capital comes in.
It
It's a dense and challenging work.
I'll see.
But it's where he really lays bare his critique of capitalism.
Okay, so in part 2, we're going to dive into capital. We're going to explore some of his most intriguing concepts like commodity fetishism, and we'll trace his ideas all the way to their revolutionary conclusion in the Communist Manifesto.
Sounds good to me.
So join us next time as we continue our deep dive into the world of Karl Marx.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Karl Marx.
Yeah.
We left off talking about Marx's magnum opus Capital. This is where he really digs into the inner workings of capitalism.
Capital, yeah. This is the big one. But I have to admit, it can be a little intimidating.
Yeah. It's definitely not a beach read.
No, it's not. It's dense. It's challenging. Where do we even begin?
Well, at the heart of Capital is Marx's analysis of exploitation.
Exploitation.
Yeah, he argues that profit isn't simply a reward for, innovation or risk-taking. It ultimately comes from the unpaid labor of workers.
Right. We touched on this earlier, but I think it's worth unpacking a little bit more.
Absolutely.
How does Marx actually explain this exploitation? What's the mechanism behind it?
He starts with the labor theory of value,
Okay.
which basically says that the value of a commodity is determined by the amount of labor it takes to produce it.
So the more labor goes into something, the more valuable it is.
Exactly.
Makes sense. But how does that lead to exploitation?
Well, Marx takes this theory a step further. He says that capitalists, because they own the means of production, the factories, the tools, the raw materials, they have the power to extract more labor from workers than they pay for.
Okay.
So let's say a worker produces enough value in 6 hours to cover the cost of their wages, but they're forced to work for 8 hours.
Yep.
Those extra 2 hours are unpaid labor,
Unpaid labor.
producing what Marx calls surplus value.
Surplus value.
And that surplus value goes straight to the capitalist.
So it's this hidden labor built into the price of the commodity, but not reflected in the worker's wages.
Precisely. It's like a secret ingredient that only the owner gets to enjoy.
Wow. And it's interesting to think about this in the context of today's global economy, where you have companies outsourcing labor to countries where wages are much lower.
Right.
Would Marx see that as just a more extreme form of exploitation?
I think he absolutely would. Globalization has just intensified this dynamic. Capitalists are constantly searching for the cheapest sources of labor.
So if this exploitation is so fundamental to capitalism, why haven't workers risen up and overthrown the system?
Well, Marx had a few explanations for that.
Okay, I'm listening.
He argued that capitalism is very good at creating illusions.
Illusions.
Yeah, at masking its own exploitative nature.
Okay, how so?
One way it does this is through what he called commodity fetishism.
Commodity fetishism. Now that sounds a little strange.
I know it's a mouthful.
But what does it actually mean?
He's talking about the way we relate to commodities, to everyday objects under capitalism.
Okay.
We tend to focus on their exchange value, their price tag.
Right, their brand name, whether they're trendy or not.
Exactly. We fetishize them.
Yeah.
We imbue them with almost magical properties. We forget about the human labor that went into producing them.
It's like we get so caught up in the act of consuming
Yeah.
that we lose sight of the human cost.
Right.
The exploitation, the environmental damage.
We just see the finished product on the shelf.
And we gotta have it.
We gotta have it.
So commodity fetishism is like a form of collective blindness.
You could say that.
A way of obscuring the true costs of capitalism.
It makes the system seem natural, inevitable, even desirable.
But Marx didn't believe it was inevitable, did he? He thought that capitalism contained the seeds of its own destruction.
That's right. He believed that capitalism is inherently prone to crises.
Crises.
To periods of economic instability and upheaval.
Like recessions, depressions, market crashes.
Exactly.
And we've certainly seen plenty of those throughout history.
We have.
But what, in Marx's view, actually causes these crises?
He pointed to a number of factors.
Okay.
But one of the most important is the tendency for the rate of profit to fall over time.
Hold on, wait. The rate of profit to fall, isn't the whole point of capitalism to maximize profit?
It seems counterintuitive, but that's the paradox Marx identified.
Okay.
He argued that as capitalists invest more and more in machinery and technology to increase productivity, they end up reducing the amount of labor needed to produce commodities.
So it's like capitalism's own success, its drive for efficiency, ends up undermining its profitability.
Exactly.
That's a mind-blowing idea.
It's one of Marx's key insights.
And this falling rate of profit leads to economic crises.
Right.
Overproduction and unemployment market crashes.
All the things we've been talking about.
And these crises aren't just accidents or aberrations. They're symptoms of a deeper problem.
They're expressions of capitalism's inherent contradictions.
So it's not just about a few bad apples, it's about the system itself.
It's about the system itself.
Okay, so capitalism is inherently exploitative. It's prone to crises. What's the solution?
That's where the Communist Manifesto comes in.
The Communist Manifesto?
It's a short but powerful work, written with Friedrich Engels.
Right.
It's basically a call to action.
And it contains some of Marx's most famous lines.
It does.
Like, the history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles.
That's the opening line.
Sets the stage for everything that follows.
It does.
And of course, who can forget the ending? Workers of the world, unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains.
Such a powerful rallying cry.
It's inspired revolutions all over the world.
It has.
But beyond those catchy slogans, what does Marx actually propose as an alternative to capitalism?
He envisions a classless society.
A classless society.
Where the means of production are owned collectively.
Collectively.
And where the exploitation of labor is abolished.
So the workers would seize control of the factories, the farms, the banks.
Everything.
And then what?
Marx didn't lay out a detailed blueprint for a communist society.
Right.
He believed that the specific forms of organization would emerge organically from the struggles of the working class.
Okay, but he did outline some general principles, right?
He did.
Like the idea of from each according to his ability to each according to his needs.
Exactly.
Meaning everyone contributes what they can and everyone receives what they need.
That's the idea.
Sounds idealistic, but how would that actually work in practice?
That's a question that has been debated endlessly.
By Marxists and their critics.
By everyone.
So it's not just about seizing power, it's about fundamentally changing the way we think about work ownership, the distribution of resources.
It's about creating a society where human needs, not profit, are the driving force.
A radical vision, to be sure.
It is.
And one that has obviously had a huge impact on history.
No doubt about it.
But as we know, the communist revolutions inspired by Marx's ideas haven't always turned out the way he envisioned.
That's true.
They've often led to authoritarian regimes, state repression, economic stagnation. So how do we reconcile the failures of actually existing communist states with Marx's vision of a classless, egalitarian society?
It's a complex question. Some argue that these regimes were betrayals of Marx's true vision.
That they were distorted by power-hungry leaders.
Right.
Others say that the seeds of these failures were present in Marx's own thinking.
His emphasis on class struggle and revolution.
So there's a lot of debate about how to interpret Marx's work.
There always has been.
And how to apply his ideas in the 21st century.
Even more so today.
So even though he died in 1883, his ideas are still being debated, reinterpreted, applied to new challenges.
His work is still alive.
It's amazing. So out of everything we've discussed, what do you think are the aspects of his work that are most relevant to the world we live in today?
I think his critique of capitalism, his insights into the ways in which power and inequality are embedded in our economic system, those are more relevant than ever.
You know, it's striking how many of the issues Marx was writing about in the 19th century, exploitation, alienation, economic crises, the concentration of wealth, they still resonate with us today.
They do, and I think his work can help us see the world differently, to question assumptions, to challenge the status quo, to imagine more just and equitable alternatives.
So even if we don't fully embrace his vision for a communist future, we can still learn from his analysis of the problems we face in the present.
Absolutely.
It's about engaging in critical thinking, about challenging power structures, about organizing for social change.
It's about recognizing the continuity between the struggles of the past and the struggles of the present.
And Marx himself was all about education, about understanding the world in order to change it. He wasn't calling for blind revolution. He was calling for informed action.
Right.
For a conscious effort to create a better future.
He believed that knowledge is power.
And he was a lifelong learner himself.
Absolutely. He was always studying, reading, debating, refining his ideas.
He wasn't afraid to challenge his own assumptions.
Never.
To grapple with uncomfortable truths.
He was a truth seeker.
And that's something we can all learn from.
It is.
To be truly engaged citizens. We need to be lifelong learners.
We do.
Constantly seeking new knowledge, new perspectives, new ways of understanding the world.
And we need to be critical thinkers.
Critical thinkers.
Willing to question assumptions, to challenge power structures, to imagine alternatives.
I think that's a great place to leave it for today.
I agree.
This deep dive into Marx has been both challenging and enlightening.
It has.
And I think it's clear that his work will continue to provoke challenge and inspire us for generations to come.
No doubt about it.
So join us next time for part 3, where we'll explore the question of Marx's enduring legacy and how his ideas might inform our understanding of the 21st century.
It's going to be fascinating.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've been on quite a journey, exploring the life and ideas of Karl Marx, a thinker who, even over a century after his death, still sparks debate and inspires movements. For social change,
It's amazing how relevant his work still feels, isn't it?
it really is. I mean, we've talked about his critiques of 19th century capitalism, but what about today? What about our world? Of globalization, automation, the digital economy? Do his ideas still hold up in the 21st century?
That's the big question, isn't it? I mean, could Marx have predicted the rise of these massive multinational corporations with more wealth than some countries?
Right.
Or the way technology is transforming work, creating new forms of alienation and precarity?
It's like his ideas about alienation and the dehumanizing aspects of capitalism
Yeah.
have taken on a whole new dimension.
Yeah, think about it. We have algorithms dictating our work schedules, social media platforms monetizing our attention, automation threatening to displace entire categories of jobs.
It's kind of unsettling when you think about it that way.
It is.
And what about the gig economy, where workers are increasingly atomized, isolated, stripped of traditional labor protections?
It's like Marx's concept of the reserve army of labor come to life.
The reserve army of labor.
Yeah, that pool of unemployed and underemployed workers that capitalists can draw on to keep wages low
Right.
and workers in line.
It's all about maintaining that power imbalance.
Exactly.
And then there's the way we consume. We're bombarded with advertising, encouraged to buy more stuff, upgrade our devices, keep up with the latest trends.
Commodity fetishism on steroids.
Right.
And social media just amplifies all of this. It blurs the lines between consumption identity and social connection.
We're not just buying products anymore. We're buying into lifestyles, aspirations, anxieties.
It's a breeding ground for the kind of alienation and false consciousness that Marx warned about.
So it seems like Marx's analysis of capitalism is more relevant than ever.
I think so.
But does that mean we're doomed? Are we stuck in this cycle of exploitation and crisis?
I don't think so. I think Marx's work, while often pretty bleak in its assessment of capitalism, also offers a glimmer of hope.
Okay, I'm listening.
Remember, he saw the proletariat, the working class, as the potential agents of change. He believed that by understanding the workings of capitalism, by recognizing its inherent contradictions, we could start to imagine and create a more just and equitable world.
So it's not about passively accepting things as they are?
No, it's about engaging in critical thinking, challenging power structures, organizing for social change.
But what would that look like today? I mean, what would a Marxist revolution look like in the 21st century?
That's a question a lot of people are asking. The forms of resistance and struggle are evolving, just as capitalism is evolving.
Right.
We see movements for economic justice, for labor rights, for environmental sustainability, for democratic control over technology.
These movements might not all identify as Marxist, but they're grappling with a lot of the same issues.
They are?
And one thing that really struck me about Marx is his emphasis on education, on understanding the world in order to change it.
He was a big believer in that.
He wasn't just calling for blind revolution. He wanted people to be informed, to make conscious and deliberate choices.
He was a scholar, a researcher, a voracious reader. He never stopped learning.
And he wasn't afraid to challenge his own assumptions, to engage in debate, to really wrestle with complex ideas.
That's a valuable lesson for all of us.
It is, to be engaged citizens, to effectively challenge injustice.
Right.
We need to be lifelong learners,
We do.
always seeking out new knowledge, new perspectives, new ways of understanding the world.
And we need to be critical thinkers.
To question, to challenge, to imagine alternatives.
Exactly.
Well said. I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive into Karl Marx.
It's been quite a journey.
It has. We've covered a lot of ground, from his early life and intellectual influences to his critique of capitalism and his vision for a communist future. We've explored the complexities of his legacy and the enduring relevance of his ideas. I hope this deep dive has inspired you to learn more about Marx, to engage with his ideas, and to think critically about the world around you.
I second that.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.